the book that I'm working on religion and politics, is really looking at the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, all of which we find where religion and politics are connected. But they're connected in different ways. And part of what I've discovered in a 30-year exploration, academically and experientially, is that many of the images that people have of religion and politics, strict separation of church and state, or in Islam it's all one thing, it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And so we're living at a time in world history where the dynamic relationship between religion and politics is often very explosive and unpredictable. And so the more we can understand what are the parameters, what are the options, that there's a lot of diversity within Islam. There are a lot of different ways people understand these issues in the United States and in Israel too, where religion and politics are intertwined. And so how can we chart a course forward that's as constructive as possible? What are the options? So we're not reading and understanding either our own tradition or other people's religious traditions through the lens of misunderstanding or even ignorance. There's a great deal that I think Christians don't really understand about these issues. There's a great deal that Muslims don't understand about the issues within their own tradition. So I try to sort this out and look for some common themes, and I think that I have found that. The book should be out in about a year. Religion and politics are always linked in various ways, and sometimes more subtly, sometimes very overtly. But we saw, for example, in the presidential process, very interesting dynamics. If people remember back and scratch a little bit below the surface, there was a lot of discussion when Mitt Romney got into the race about his being Mormon. And what does that mean? And we had people, there were things even that Governor Huckabee was saying about Mormonism that excited some people and caused consternation in other quarters. Huckabee himself, a former Baptist minister, obviously was very popular among many on the religious right because he was much closer to the views there than, let's say, John McCain had been. Remember James Dobson, the very well-known Christian leader out of Colorado, made very strong statements that he would never support McCain under any circumstances, and then, of course, eventually he did. But that was part of his reaction to what he saw as McCain being too moderate on certain issues related to abortion or some of the bedrock issues for the religious right, where Huckabee was much more acceptable in that regard. We saw McCain then, who had been very badly treated, most people thought, in 2000 by Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, those folks, getting an honorary degree from Jerry Falwell's university before Jerry Falwell passed away. And then we saw him go and get the endorsement of Pastor John Hagee down in San Antonio, and Rod Parsley, another very conservative TV evangelist out of Ohio. And this was clearly a way McCain was looking to shore up some credentials, and many people thought that Sarah Palin's pick was also connected to a concern to shore up the religious right and the base of the Republican Party. On the other side, all the debates about Obama and his relationship to his church and Pastor Jeremiah Wright, that was one whole set of issues where religion came into the mix there as well. And of course, as we know, survey after survey showed that 10, 12, 15% of the American populace on election day thought that Barack Obama was really a Muslim, even though that issue had been covered rather thoroughly and rather dramatically. But you could see in all those kinds of things, and many others, how religion was swirling into the mix as a very important issue. There used to be in the office of the White House what was called the Office of Public Liaison, which was kind of the gatekeeper for appointments to the president, and there were people in that office who related particularly to the Jewish community and to the Christian community. I was actually in the late 80s when the first President Bush was elected in 1988. I was invited and offered a job in the White House to facilitate relationships with the religious communities, including the Muslim community. They really were trying to expand and reach out more to American Muslims. At the time, I didn't take that position because of just family reasons. I didn't want to go 24/7 with two small children, working in the White House. But so the point is that these relationships have always been there and negotiated. What we're seeing now is, I think there's a perception, and I think it's correct, that President Obama is more open to a range of views. And so all kinds of people are rushing to fill that vacuum to say, well, to consider this, or this is really important. You said you were interested in hearing different points of view, and of course everybody wants access. I think if we approach, and a term that I like very much is honest patriots, that one can be patriotic and be very honest and be willing to look at the strengths and weaknesses, the good and the bad. I mean, that really is part of our whole democratic tradition, that, you know, we debate issues and we don't necessarily agree, and we don't even agree with ourselves maybe from one year to the next when we change our views about something. So on the one hand, I think there's a great deal to celebrate in the U.S. in terms of religious diversity and our openness and freedom of religion and freedom from government-imposed religion. At the same time, I think we always have to be mindful and be honest about the history of religious intolerance that is a part of our heritage as well. And we've seen, for instance, a resurgence of the Klan, recent stories, and that is a classic case of religious intolerance. These are very people who perceive themselves as deeply Christian and deeply intolerant, as we know. My point is that we have been engaged in this experiment of religious diversity and pluralism for over 2 centuries. And we have learned a lot, and we wrestle with it. We don't all agree, but we keep wrestling with what is the appropriate relationship between church and state, or mosque and state, or temple and state, and how do we negotiate that future so that people are free to worship as they see fit, as long as they're not harming other people. I think the rest of the world can learn a great deal from that. Doesn't mean we're perfect, we're far from it, and there's been a long history of intolerance as well, but we also learn from that intolerance and say that's not the road we want to go down. And I hope we'll be able to help show others in the world who are just now beginning to engage those issues in a world that's very much armed to the teeth. You know, don't make these mistakes. Learn from what we've already been doing. There are ways to live together respectfully. Doesn't mean you have to agree with somebody else's theology, but you can respect that and live together side by side and say, we really do believe in freedom of religion, and model that for the rest of the world. So I'm very hopeful that we will be better and better and more consciously talking about the principles that we affirm and doing everything we can to live up to the principles that we affirm and model that for the rest of the world.